Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. The conversations that I bring into this podcasting space are always shaped by you, your questions, your thoughts, and the emails and messages you send. They're also shaped by what I've been noticing and reflecting on in my own life. And over the past few months, one theme that keeps surfacing is the idea of soul care, which many of us instinctively equate with self-care. When we hear those words, I'm mindful of the fact that each of us brings our own life experiences, theologies, and personal stories that shape how we interpret them and how we practice them. For some, self-care looks like taking a day off work to rest, soaking in a long, hot bath, or booking a massage. For others, it might be a vacation, journaling, or time alone. But here's where I want to draw a distinction. While self-care is about tending to our physical, emotional, and mental well-being, soul care goes deeper. It's about tending to the innermost part of who we are. Self-care can restore energy and ease stress, but soul care restores connection to God, to ourselves, and to others. Self-care may refresh the body and mind for a time, but soul care roots us in practices and rhythms that sustain us for the long haul. Unfortunately, the idea of soul care is often misunderstood. It's dismissed as self-indulgent, self-centered, or even unnecessary, but nothing could be further from the truth. What if we thought of soul care not as an occasional indulgence, but as a rhythm of attention and response woven into the ordinary flow of our days? What if we looked at soul care not as a luxury, but as the steady, intentional practice of caring for the deepest parts of who we are? Because here's what I'm discovering. Soul care isn't about a periodic break or escape. It's about organizing our lives around the kind of rhythms that Jesus lived by. Rhythms of work and rest, fast and slow. It's about cultivating a practice of paying attention to what's happening within us and then making small, faithful choices in the ordinary moments of our everyday lives. Soul care isn't selfish. It's a profoundly spiritual practice, one that lies at the very heart of living a flourishing, vibrant, abundant life in Christ. That's why we're beginning a new podcast series called Soul Care Practices for a Sustainable Life, because I'm learning that living a truly sustainable life doesn't begin outside of us. It doesn't start with our schedules, but with our souls. Author, educator, and activist Parker Palmer captures this beautifully when he says, "The soul speaks its truth only under quiet, inviting, and trustworthy conditions. The soul is like a wild animal, tough, resilient, savvy, self-sufficient, and yet exceedingly shy. If we want to see a wild animal, the last thing we should do is go crashing through the woods, shouting for the creature to come out. But if we are willing to walk quietly into the woods and sit silently for an hour or two at the base of a tree, the creature we are waiting for may well emerge. And out of the corner of an eye, we will catch a glimpse of the precious wildness we seek." Our souls, much like that wild creature, require patience, quiet, and trustworthy conditions to emerge. The soul cannot be forced or rushed. So as we move forward in this series, I hope you'll join me in exploring how to move beyond occasional self-care moments to focus on the daily rhythms that truly sustain our inner lives. Together, we'll discern what helps our souls thrive, how to tend to them in real time, and how to make restoration an ongoing part of life. So let's begin. Sometimes I think the most helpful way to start something new is simply to share where I've been. So let me begin by sharing some reflections on my summer and why this topic feels so important to me. If you've been following along with my journey over the past year, you know that I've been in grad school for clinical mental health counseling. In the state of Virginia, where I'm getting licensed, the requirements, in addition to an intensive grad program, include 4,000 hours of supervised practice and multiple board exams just for licensure. A few weeks ago, I shared in an episode that I was preparing for my first exam. As a quick side note, I was so grateful for the texts and messages you sent me after the episode released. For those who were praying, good news, I passed. But anyway, from grad school to the end of residency, the whole process to become licensed as an LPC usually takes between 5 to 7 years. And last Thursday, I drove to campus for my very last 2.5-hour grad class. It was the wildest, most surreal feeling. Afterwards, I went to my car, sat in the parking garage, and cried. This entire season has been full of so much goodness, and at the same time, it's felt like a little too much for a little too long. Grad school is already such a unique and demanding season, and this summer, the stress and pace of everything nearly pushed me past my limit. It began affecting even basic health things like sleep, and honestly, it wasn't good. But I'm happy to announce that as of yesterday, my degree was officially conferred, and I'm looking at my first fall ever where I'm not in school. Rather than the weekly rhythm of deadlines and the seasonal changes of semesters, I get to decide, with the Holy Spirit, what this next season will look like. And here's the truth. I want to learn how to practice soul care well. Honestly, I don't fully know how yet, but I want to learn. And that's why this fall, I want to learn together. Over the next few months, I'll share what I've been reflecting on and learning. And I've also invited wise and trusted voices in the fields of soul care and spiritual formation to mentor us. My hope is that together, we'll learn what it means to tend to our souls well. I know that all of us come to this space in different stages and seasons of life. In fact, if you were to look at the demographics of listeners for Faith and Feelings, you'd see a wide spectrum of ages across every decade of life. But here's what I've been noticing, a common experience that I think so many of us can relate to and that my summer certainly held. It's this cycle of exertion, burnout, and withdrawal that feels nearly impossible to break. So what do we need to help us live the way that we want to in the world for the long haul? More like Jesus and less like our typical modern-day stressed-out selves. Last weekend, I had the opportunity to coordinate a workshop on the Christian integration of a therapeutic approach called internal family systems therapy with licensed therapist Julie Honeycutt. Julie was actually on the podcast a few weeks ago where we explored what it looks like to become your own primary caregiver. That episode has been one of our most popular this summer, so if you haven't listened yet, I highly recommend it. But during the workshop, Julie said something that really stayed with me. She was talking about the concept of soul care and said, when we are physically vulnerable, we become emotionally vulnerable. And when we are emotionally vulnerable, we become spiritually vulnerable. Let me say that again because it's worth hearing twice. When we are physically vulnerable, we become emotionally vulnerable. And when we are emotionally vulnerable, we become spiritually vulnerable. I think we could spend an entire episode unpacking the layers of that statement, but what stands out to me is how beautifully it reflects the holistic way we're wired as human beings. Our bodies, emotions, and souls aren't separate compartments. They're deeply interconnected. When we're physically vulnerable through illness, injury, exhaustion, or chronic stress, our bodies send signals of distress to our nervous systems. Over time, those signals can weaken our immune system and reduce our capacity for emotional regulation. Often, our bodies speak through symptoms like anxiety, irritability, or numbness. And in this state, our threshold for emotional overwhelm is lower. Emotional vulnerability, in turn, opens the door to spiritual vulnerability. When we feel raw, exhausted, or burned out, we can become more exposed to shame, doubt, or even despair. Spiritually, we may feel disoriented, destabilized, or internally fragmented. In other words, physical, emotional, and spiritual vulnerability flow into one another. They don't exist in isolation. Tending to one layer supports all three, and neglecting any one layer strains the others. Therapist Janice McWilliams, who we're actually going to hear from in a few weeks, calls this one-dimensional soul care. In her book, Restore My Soul, she explains that we often get stuck because we assume soul care only needs to happen occasionally or that it only addresses one part of our lives. But I'm learning that true soul care isn't just an emergency measure to be taken when we're on the edge of burnout. It's not something we pull out as a last resort effort to prevent physical or emotional overload. It's not simply me time or a way to justify doing pleasurable activities. These occasional practices, while important, are not enough to sustain a life of true flourishing. Instead, we need to learn how to live well in an ongoing way. We need a model of soul care that encourages us to tend to our inner lives in the ordinary moments, the minutes and hours that make up our everyday lives. As Janice puts it, life-sustaining self-care is a call to a moment-by-moment, hour-by-hour, and day-by-day living where we are increasingly confident that we know how to handle everything that is happening inside us. The journey to a restored soul involves starting to see your inner world more clearly and then learning to apply life-sustaining self-care. This means learning to manage our inner worlds as we navigate the pressures and obstacles that show up every day. Soul care that truly sustains involves learning to tend to our emotions, thoughts, pacing, and moods at a deeper level, addressing soul care at its roots. It asks us to care for ourselves in ways that bring lasting restoration rather than momentary relief. And that's what we'll be exploring together over the next few months here on Faith and Feelings. My hope is that this series will meet you where you are in whatever season you're in, whether you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed, or you're simply longing for more fulfillment and joy in the midst of your routines. I'll see you next week. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.